My name is Ethan Callahan. At 39 years old, I had spent 8 grueling years of my life building the core foundation of Aegis Global Capital. We were a high-frequency trading firm that moved billions of dollars across global financial markets every single day. I was the vice president of systems architecture and infrastructure. But to the people who ran the company, I was just a guy behind a computer screen. On a cold, rainy Tuesday morning, my entire life was rewritten in less than 5 minutes. It started with an urgent calendar invite for a meeting on the 40th floor. When I walked into the glass-walled main boardroom, I immediately noticed the atmosphere was dead silent. CEO Garrett Thorne was standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows, holding an espresso. Standing right beside him was a 24-year-old kid wearing a navy blue designer suit that was clearly tailored for someone twice his age. That kid was Lucas Thorne, Garrett's nephew. I sat down at the heavy oak conference table, but before I could even open my folder, Garrett spoke up. He didn't offer me a seat, and he didn't ask how my morning was going. "Ethan, we're making a dynamic leadership shift in your department," Garrett said, his voice completely flat. "Effective immediately, your position as Vice President of Infrastructure is terminated." The words hit me like a physical punch. I looked at Garrett, then turned my eyes toward Lucas. The kid had a faint, arrogant smirk on his face. Garrett continued without missing a beat. "We need fresh, visionary talent to push this firm into the future. We can no longer justify paying an overpriced legacy coder to maintain outdated technology." Lucas here just graduated from business school with a master's degree in computational finance. He will be taking over as head of technology starting today. I took a slow breath, keeping my voice completely calm. "Garrett, I built our entire trade settlement pipeline from scratch. Every transaction, every clearing ledger, and every high-speed routing protocol runs on the engine I coded. You can't just drop a 24-year-old kid with zero real-world engineering experience into that environment." Lucas leaned across the table, his smile widening into a condescending sneer. "With all due respect, Ethan, your code is legacy junk. It's bloated, overly cautious, and unnecessarily complex. Give me 1 week, and I'll streamline your entire framework and increase execution speeds by 20%. The tech world moves fast. Old guys who can't adapt just get left behind." Before I could reply, 2 uniformed security guards walked into the boardroom. Garrett didn't even look me in the eye as he gestured toward the door. "Hand over your keycards, your company phone, and your laptop, Ethan," Garrett said coldly. "Security will escort you off the premises immediately. Do not attempt to contact anyone on the trading floor." I placed my badges and hardware devices gently on the glass table. I wasn't allowed to return to my corner office to pick up my personal notebook or the framed photo of my family. The security guards grabbed my arms and marched me out into the central hallway. The main office floor housed over 70 employees. As I was walked past the long rows of trading desks, the room fell dead quiet. Everyone stared in utter shock. Garrett stepped out of the boardroom and raised his voice so the entire office could hear him. "Thank you for your service, Ethan," Garrett announced, his voice echoing off the concrete pillars. "Thanks for keeping the seat warm for my nephew." A few young associates chuckled nervously, while my senior team members looked down at their keyboards in shame. The humiliation was calculated. It was designed to crush my reputation and send a clear message that no one was untouchable. They marched me into the elevator, down to the lobby, and pushed me out into the pouring rain. Standing on the sidewalk, drenched in cold water, I realized something that made a quiet smile spread across my face. Garrett Thorne and his nephew had spent weeks planning this ambush. But in their rush to humiliate me, they had made a catastrophic, multi-million-dollar mistake. They assumed I was just a salaried employee who wrote code for a paycheck. They had forgotten one fundamental truth. The proprietary core clearing engine that ran their entire trade settlement pipeline wasn't owned by Aegis Global Capital. It was my personal intellectual property, licensed to the company under a revocable agreement, and they had just fired the only man who held the master key to $15 million in active transactions. I stood on the wet sidewalk outside the corporate tower, holding a single cardboard box filled with a few loose pens and a notebook. Security guards watched me through the heavy glass doors, making sure I didn't step back onto private property. The personal sting was deep. I had given 8 years of my life to Aegis. I had worked 80-hour weeks, skipped family vacations, and answered emergency calls at 3 in the morning to make sure our trade routing systems never went down. I had treated the company like my own child, only to be thrown out onto the street like trash so a CEO could give his unqualified nephew a 6-figure salary. I took a deep breath, walked to my car, and drove straight back to my apartment. The second I walked inside, I set the cardboard box on the floor and went directly to my home office. I booted up my personal encrypted computer and pulled up my private legal archives. I opened a file folder labeled 2020 Infrastructure Deployment Agreement. 6 years ago, when Aegis was expanding rapidly, they needed a custom settlement engine to process cross-border high-frequency trades. I had already built the foundational code independently before I ever took the job. Garrett Thorne wanted the software desperately, but he was notoriously cheap. When I offered to sell him the master source code buyout rights for $2 million, Garrett refused. He wanted to save money on his annual budget sheet to inflate his executive bonus. So, we signed an operational software lease instead. Under Section 14B of that contract, Aegis was granted a conditional, non-exclusive license to use my trade settlement software. But there was a critical clause embedded deep inside the legal text that Garrett had completely overlooked. The license was explicitly tied to my continuous employment as chief systems architect. If my employment was severed by the company without cause, the software license automatically entered a 48-hour revocation grace period. While I was reviewing the legal contracts at my desk, my former team lead sent me a screenshot from his personal phone. Lucas Thorne had wasted no time asserting his authority. At 1 o'clock that afternoon, Lucas sent an all-hands email to the entire executive board, IT team, and trading floor. The email was titled, "Modernizing Aegis, Moving Past Legacy Architecture." In the message, Lucas openly mocked my work. He called my core infrastructure sloppy, needlessly complex, and bloated with artificial safety protocols. To prove how smart he was, Lucas announced in the email that he was personally logging into the central production server that afternoon to disable my custom security checkpoints. He claimed those safety protocols were slowing down execution times by 3 milliseconds and promised that removing them would boost daily profits. I stared at the screenshot and let out a cold laugh. Lucas thought those safety protocols were just useless lines of defensive code designed to justify my high salary. He had no idea what he was looking at. Those safety layers were not bloatware. They were advanced real-time compliance filters designed to manage volatile market fluctuations and prevent multi-million-dollar liquidity locks during international settlements. By disabling those protocols, Lucas wasn't optimizing the software. He was taking the emergency brakes off a 50-ton train, speeding toward a broken track. He was about to trigger an automated self-defense sequence he didn't even know existed, and there was absolutely nothing he could do to stop it. I poured myself a hot cup of black coffee, sat down at my workstation, and opened the core architecture schematic displayed across my monitors. Deep inside the foundation of the trade settlement engine, there was a specific piece of code I had written 6 years ago. I called it the handshake protocol. It was a simple, automated safety mechanism. Every 48 hours, the core trading engine required a local cryptographic security refresh. This refresh could only be generated by a physical hardware security key, a small, custom-encrypted drive that sat right now on my desk in a leather tray. Without that physical key, plugged directly into the master server, the software could not verify its legal licensing status. But I had built an even deeper layer of defense into the system. If an unauthorized user logged into the master console and tried to rewrite the core settlement parameters without master administrative credentials, the software was hard-coded to treat the activity as an active cyber attack or host environment compromise. The system wouldn't just crash or shut down. Instead, it would assume the firm's servers were under attack by offshore hackers trying to steal corporate capital. To protect institutional money and prevent illegal transfers, the core engine would automatically enter defensive isolation mode. Once defensive isolation mode was triggered, the software would instantly lock every active trade settlement, freeze all margin reserves, and halt every pending cross-border clearing transfer inside an impenetrable, encrypted ledger vault. Nobody could move the money. Nobody could force the transactions through. The entire multi-billion-dollar trade pipeline would freeze dead in its tracks. Garrett Thorne had intentionally chosen this risk years ago. When we negotiated my original agreement, he refused to buy out my master source code rights because he wanted to keep $2 million on Aegis's corporate balance sheet to boost his end-of-year executive bonus. He thought he was being a ruthless, brilliant corporate negotiator. He thought he was saving the company money. In reality, he had left his entire firm's financial infrastructure dependent on a conditional operational lease, a lease that legally terminated the exact moment he fired me without cause. Meanwhile, back at the corporate office, my phone was quietly buzzing with messages from mid-level managers on the technical floor. Lucas Thorne was logged into the primary server console on the 40th floor. Sitting in my old chair, surrounded by empty coffee cups and acting like a technical prodigy, he was manually deleting system security logs and forcing parameter overrides. He believed those security logs were just useless text files, taking up drive space and slowing down execution times. Every time Lucas deleted a protective file, the system recorded an unauthorized override attempt. The engine was quietly tracking his every move, counting each forced parameter change as an aggressive system breach. He even disabled the secondary verification prompts that warned him about database corruption risks. Lucas was walking around the office, smiling, boasting to the junior traders that he was modernizing our back-end framework and eliminating unnecessary legacy bloat. He was completely blind to the reality of what he was doing. He had no idea that every single command line he executed was bringing the system closer to a hard cryptographic lockdown. The clock was ticking. The 48-hour grace period was running out fast. Aegis Global Capital was speeding toward an invisible brick wall, and the CEO's nephew was stepping harder on the accelerator, completely unaware that he was about to trigger a financial disaster. With the technical trap arming itself through Lucas's own arrogance, I spent the rest of the morning focusing on the legal side of my strategy. I called my corporate litigation attorney, a sharp man who specialized in intellectual property and software licensing disputes. An hour later, I sat in his office and laid out my evidence on his conference table. I presented our signed licensing contracts, my employment termination letter signed by Garrett Thorne, and the official copyright registration certificates proving I owned the core settlement software. My lawyer read through Section 14B of the agreement, looked up at me, and let out a whistle. "They fired you without cause while using software you personally own?" my attorney asked, shaking his head in disbelief. And they didn't clear the buyout clause first? Garrett was too cheap to pay for the buyout 6 years ago, I replied calmly. And he was too arrogant to check the lease terms before escorting me out of the building. My lawyer immediately began drafting a formal cease and desist notice, alongside a legal demand for the immediate return and deletion of all unlicensed proprietary technology. We didn't send it right away. We timed it to land precisely when the system would reach its maximum point of vulnerability. While my lawyer prepared the paperwork, I maintained absolute silence. My personal phone was blowing up with frantic text messages and missed calls from mid-level infrastructure managers back at Aegis. They were starting to notice small execution delays on the trading floor. Orders that usually settled in milliseconds were now taking several seconds to clear. They wanted me to log in remotely and fix the lag. I didn't answer a single call. I didn't reply to a single text. I knew that any assistance I provided would give them an excuse to claim I was still acting as an employee. Silence was my strongest position. Back at the office, Lucas Thorne was escalating his mistakes. Eager to show off his authority to his uncle, Lucas decided to clean up what he called redundant back-end routines. He logged into the primary database cluster and permanently deleted our secondary backup loops. He thought having duplicate backup files was inefficient and claimed that removing them would make the database run faster. As he deleted the backup routines, automated warning banners began flashing across the primary server monitors in bright amber text. The system was warning him that system redundancy had fallen to 0%. Instead of stopping to investigate, Lucas dismissed the alerts. He told the junior engineers standing near his desk that those warnings were just legacy error noise left behind by my outdated framework. From the comfort of my home office, I opened public financial market execution ledgers and monitored Aegis's trade flows in real time. The signs of system decay were becoming obvious to anyone who knew what to look for. Transaction settlement speeds were slowing down across every major European currency pair. The system was straining under the weight of unverified trades. Lucas had no idea he was stripping away the precise safety buffers that protected the firm from massive financial liabilities. On the trading floor, he was walking around sipping an iced coffee, high-fiving senior sales executives and taking credit for streamlining the technology stack. He genuinely believed he was revolutionizing the company's operations. In reality, he was standing inside a powder keg with a lit match, holding his uncle's company over the edge of a cliff. 36 hours after I was escorted out of the building, Lucas Thorne made his final, fatal mistake. At 3 o'clock on Wednesday morning, while the European financial markets were opening, Lucas logged into the master server console from his office. He was eager to show off a new set of automated scripts he had spent the evening copying from an online developer forum. Without running a single test on a sandbox server, he executed his custom code override across the primary production servers. The second his unverified code touched the core settlement pipeline, the engine triggered its internal security response. The software attempted to verify its legal licensing status, but my physical hardware security key was sitting on my desk at home. The system detected an unauthorized administrative override, illegal parameter changes, and missing license verification files. To the automated engine, this looked like an offshore cyber attack trying to breach our financial reserves. The software's defense protocol activated instantly. Inside the primary database, the handshake protocol failed completely. A red system alert flashed across every server rack in the building, and the core software immediately entered defensive isolation mode. Within milliseconds, the engine slammed the digital doors shut. It locked every active trade settlement, froze all cross-border margin reserves, and sealed $15 million in live operational capital inside an impenetrable, encrypted ledger vault. When the trading floor opened at 8 in the morning, complete chaos erupted. Traders sat down at their desks, opened their screens, and realized they couldn't process a single order. European institutional clients were screaming over the phones as their cross-border trades bounced back unexecuted. Millions of dollars in pending financial transactions were frozen in place, completely unresponsive. Instead of stepping up and admitting his incompetence, Lucas panicked. He sat at his desk with cold sweat dripping down his face, desperately trying to type commands into the terminal. But the system was locked solid. In a desperate attempt to cover his tracks, Lucas began deleting error logs and clearing history files. He ran into CEO Garrett Thorne's corner office and lied directly to his uncle's face. Lucas claimed that I had installed a malicious logic bomb in the code before I was fired, intentionally designed to destroy the company's infrastructure out of spite. Garrett didn't stop to verify the truth. Driven by pure rage and terrifying corporate fear, he opened his email and typed out an aggressive, frantic message to my personal address. The email subject line was written in all capital letters: "Legal warning, immediate criminal prosecution. Garrett accused me of corporate sabotage, extortion, and cybercrime." He claimed he was already on the phone with the FBI and our state prosecutors. He threatened to have me thrown in federal prison for the rest of my life unless I logged into the servers remotely and unlocked the trading system within 2 hours. I sat comfortably at my kitchen table, drinking a warm cup of coffee while reading his furious email on my personal laptop. My heart rate didn't even go up. I didn't panic and I didn't yell. I knew the law and I knew my contract. I opened a reply window, typed out a cold 11-word response, and attached a single PDF file. "Please refer to Section 14B of my signed employment and licensing agreement." The PDF attachment was a copy of our original deployment contract, with Section 14B highlighted in yellow ink. It clearly stated that Aegis held only a conditional operational lease, a lease that instantly terminated the moment my employment was severed without cause. When Garrett opened that attachment on the 40th floor, he was staring at absolute proof that I hadn't hacked anything, I hadn't installed a virus, and I hadn't committed a crime. He had fired the sole owner of the system, and his own nephew had triggered the lockdown. Garrett Thorne had destroyed his own company with his own hands. The fallout was swift, brutal, and completely impossible to contain. By 10 o'clock that morning, major global financial exchanges began issuing formal trade default notices against Aegis Global Capital. Prime brokers suspended our institutional trading privileges, and $15 million in active client funds remained completely frozen inside an inaccessible encrypted vault. The firm was hemorrhaging money by the second, and news of the system failure was spreading fast across the financial district. When word reached the board of directors that Aegis was facing immediate regulatory shutdown, massive client lawsuits, and total bankruptcy by close of business, an emergency board session was called on the 40th floor. Garrett Thorne stood at the head of the long oak conference table, his face pale and his hands shaking as he tried to control the room. He repeatedly claimed that I was a rogue employee holding the company hostage with a malicious cyber weapon. But the board had already seen enough. They had brought in an independent, third-party cybersecurity auditor to inspect the primary server logs in real time. The chief auditor stood up in front of the board, opened his laptop, and projected his findings onto the large wall screens. The former VP of Infrastructure did not install a logic bomb or a virus, the auditor stated clearly, his voice echoing through the silent boardroom. The system locked itself down because an unauthorized user logged into master production without a valid license or security key, manually deleted safety protocols, and repeatedly forced illegal parameter overrides. The lead board director turned his glare directly toward Lucas Thorne. Who was sitting at that master console? Lucas, sitting in an expensive suit beside his uncle, collapsed under the pressure. He broke down in tears, right in front of the executive committee. Through stifled sobs, he admitted that he had logged into the system, deleted the error logs, and tried to rewrite the code himself. He confessed that he had no idea how the encryption worked and had no technical ability to bypass the security vault. The entire boardroom went dead silent. The board members stared at Garrett in absolute horror. They realized that Garrett had committed gross executive negligence. To give his 24-year-old nephew a high-paying executive job, Garrett had illegally fired the only man who owned the core intellectual property running their entire business. In doing so, he had stripped the firm of its software rights, triggered a multi-million-dollar financial lock, and exposed every member of the board to personal legal liability. Garrett tried to speak, stuttering as he attempted to defend his nephew, but the lead director held up his hand. "Shut your mouth, Garrett," the lead director said, his voice dripping with ice. "You put this firm on the brink of total destruction to satisfy your family ego." Right then and there, the board held an emergency procedural vote. They stripped Garrett Thorne of all operational executive authority on the spot. He was suspended from his duties as CEO effective immediately. The board completely bypassed Garrett, took control of the crisis, and frantically searched through company records to find my personal phone number. They weren't threatening me with prison anymore. They were terrified, desperate, and begging for a way out. My phone rang precisely at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I looked at the screen and saw an unknown corporate number from the firm's main line. It was the lead director of the board. When I answered, his usual authoritative, booming voice was completely gone. He sounded breathless, exhausted, and desperately polite. "Ethan, thank you for taking my call," he said, skipping any corporate pleasantries. "We are in the middle of an emergency executive board meeting on the 40th floor. The company is facing catastrophic liquidity failure. We need you on a secure video conference right now. Please." I took a slow sip of my water, adjusted my headset, and opened the video meeting link he sent to my email. I didn't bother putting on a suit. I sat in front of my webcam wearing a comfortable gray t-shirt, completely relaxed in my home office. On the screen, 30 panic-stricken faces appeared in high-definition video. The room was packed with senior board members, managing directors, and institutional legal advisors. In the far corner of the boardroom, CEO Garrett Thorne sat slumped in his leather chair. His face was pale, his shirt collar was unbuttoned, and sweat was visibly shining on his forehead. Next to him sat his nephew Lucas, staring blankly at the glass conference table like a ghost. The lead director spoke first. "Ethan, we have been briefed on the situation by our independent cybersecurity auditors. We now understand that the software powering our trade settlement framework is your personal intellectual property, and that a licensing issue occurred following your departure. We need you to override the encryption vault immediately. Every minute this system stays locked, we are losing millions of dollars and facing severe regulatory penalties." I looked directly into the camera lens, keeping my tone completely calm, steady, and professional. "Gentlemen," I said, speaking clearly so every person in that room could hear every word. "Let us be very clear about what happened here. 6 years ago, Garrett Thorne refused to purchase the master source code rights to save money on his annual balance sheet. Instead, he signed a conditional operational lease. Under Section 14B of that signed agreement, the software license automatically revoked the second I was terminated without cause." I paused, letting the weight of my words settle over the room. When Lucas Thorne logged into the production server without master credentials, I continued, he deleted safety logs and tried to force unverified code into the pipeline. The system correctly recognized his actions as an unauthorized breach attempt. The software did exactly what it was engineered to do. It locked the system to protect capital integrity. I did not attack your company. Your executive management team fired the owner of the system and allowed an unqualified relative to disable the emergency brakes. Garrett suddenly slammed his hands down on the table, leaning toward his microphone with bloodshot eyes. "You planned this," Garrett screamed, his voice cracking with rage. "You are holding a multi-billion-dollar corporation hostage. This is illegal extortion, Ethan, and I will personally see to it that—" "Garrett, shut up," the board chairman shouted, cutting him off instantly. "One more word out of you, and security will remove you from this room right now." The chairman turned back to the screen, his hands clasped together. "Ethan, please, what is it going to take to resolve this immediately? The European markets are closing soon. If that $15 million remains locked past 5 o'clock, this firm will go into default and enter bankruptcy before tomorrow morning." I pulled a single sheet of paper from my desk and read my non-negotiable settlement terms. "First," I said, "Garrett Thorne must be terminated immediately for gross executive negligence and breach of fiduciary duty. Second, Lucas Thorne must be permanently fired and barred from entering any company property. Third, the company will issue a formal, written public statement clearing my name of any wrongdoing." I paused and looked straight at the lead director. "Fourth, Aegis Global Capital will execute a complete and total buyout of my software's master intellectual property rights for a one-time cash payment of $10 million. In addition, you will pay $3 million in backdated licensing fees and severance. That is a total of $13 million, wired directly to my account before 5 o'clock. The boardroom erupted into frantic whispering. "If these terms are accepted and signed within 10 minutes, I added softly, I will transmit the master cryptographic key and release the $15 million. If you refuse, the system stays locked, and your firm will cease to exist by sundown. You have 10 minutes. The board chairman didn't even hesitate. He called for an immediate emergency vote. Within 4 minutes of intense, frantic side-channel discussion, 29 out of 30 board members raised their hands. The terms were unanimously accepted. The board's legal team worked at lightning speed. Within 20 minutes, the formal settlement agreement, the IP purchase contract, and the executive termination notices were drafted, reviewed, and electronically signed. I sat at my desk and watched the live feed from the boardroom as the final consequences unfolded. The lead director stood up, picked up a pen, and signed Garrett Thorne's official termination papers right in front of him. Garrett was stripped of his CEO title, his executive access, and his board seat on the spot. 2 heavy-set corporate security guards stepped into the boardroom, the exact same guards who had marched me out of the building 48 hours earlier. They grabbed Garrett by the arms and pulled him out of his chair. Garrett tried to argue, but the guards didn't listen. They escorted him down the main hallway, past 70 staring employees, and pushed him out through the revolving glass doors into the cold afternoon rain. Lucas followed right behind him, his head held low in total disgrace, his career in high finance over before it had even truly begun. At 4:15, my computer chimed with a notification from my bank. I opened my browser and verified the incoming wire transfer. $13 million had been deposited into my account, fully cleared and confirmed. I pulled a small leather tray toward me and picked up my physical hardware security token. I plugged the USB drive into my workstation, opened a secure terminal window, and entered my master administrative password. I typed out the cryptographic override string, the master handshake key that only I possessed. With a single press of the Enter key, my terminal broadcasted the authentication packet directly across the secure network to Aegis's primary production servers. On my secondary monitor, I watched the server status indicators in real time. The amber warning lights flashed once, twice, and then turned a solid, bright green. Inside the core clearing engine, the encrypted ledger vault unlocked instantly. In less than 10 seconds, the $15 million in frozen trade settlements cleared smoothly through the system. Pending transactions routed to their destinations, institutional accounts balanced, and the execution lag dropped back to zero. The firm survived the crisis, but the balance of power had changed forever. Garrett Thorne was disgraced, his nephew was exposed, and the board was left picking up the pieces of a very expensive lesson in executive hubris. I unlinked my terminal from their servers, permanently closing the connection. I stood up from my desk, walked away from my monitors, and stepped out onto my apartment balcony. The rain had finally stopped, and a cool breeze blew across the city skyline. I leaned against the railing, took a deep breath of fresh air, and smiled. 48 hours ago, I had been marched out of a high-rise office building like a common criminal. An arrogant CEO and his spoiled nephew had tried to crush my dignity, steal my work, and replace me with nepotism. They thought that because they wore expensive suits and held grand executive titles, they owned the world. They forgot that titles are just words on a business card. True power in the modern corporate world doesn't belong to the loudest voice in the boardroom or the man with the biggest office. It belongs to the quiet man who built the foundation, the man who knows how the machine works, holds the keys, and has the patience to let arrogant people destroy themselves. I took another slow, satisfied breath and went back inside. My work here was done.